Oh, welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Ronna, and we're continuing our focus on the post-election, talk about the nonprofit organizations in New London that are doing a lot of the work that isn't being done by our city government. So today my guest is Frida Berrigan. She is the convener of the New London chapter of the Southeast Connecticut Community Land Trust. And we'll be talking about the land trust in particular, but also about the whole issue of housing in New London town and also New London County during this show. So welcome, Frida, or welcome back.
Thank you, Ronna. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I noted before that like every time you're on the show, it seems like it's a different subject. But housing is, in the news right now. In many different ways in the news right now. So thanks for coming on.
Sure, yes.
I guess we can start by talking about the Community Land Trust. I guess it's been in existence for maybe 3 to 4 years at this point.
Yeah, it depends on where you point the pin for the origin story. But we became a registered nonprofit in 2019, I think. But we were already, had already laid the groundwork before that, and we're working under the auspices of St. Francis House early on, and had this intensive community study here in New London about housing affordability. And one of the catalysts for me getting involved was looking at the Edgerton project, which was conceived to replace the Thames River apartments, the Crystal Ave towers, and a lovely kind of mid-sized development conceived of as mixed income, right in my neighborhood there at Cedar Grove and Coleman, and but when I did the math on the per unit cost for those, I was like, wait, we're talking about apartments that are being built for, I mean, the number that comes to my mind, and this might not be exactly right, is $270,000 for an apartment. And I looked at that time, 2017, 2016, housing in my neighborhood, and I was like, there's not a single house in this neighborhood that costs that much. And so, meanwhile, there were empty houses, there were houses in dereliction, and I thought, well, gosh, this doesn't quite make sense to me. Anyway, that was sort of just my introduction to housing in this community, and then of course, as watchers of Thinking Green, and yourself, that project was slowed down by NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, by my neighbors, and slowed down to such a point that the developer wasn't eligible.
Yeah, and there were funding issues that further slowed it down.
Right, and as users of Veterans Field, a lovely field, know that that Edgerton school property remains in dereliction, and is it's surrounded by a fence now, but it remains an attractive nuisance and a real eyesore and a drag on a hardworking, relatively stable community there between Cedar Grove and Elve and Cape Ann and Connecticut there. So, but the Community Land Trust really got some legs under it when we were given the opportunity to purchase a two-family home at Press Street. and we took advantage of that opportunity. We purchased that house, and then with support from the city and support from federal programs and local donors, we were able to renovate it, make it upgrade some of the things that needed to be upgraded, stabilize the tenants who we were able to keep in place, and then sell that to a young local New London guy who was then able to, right before the pandemic, timing is everything, right before the pandemic, was able to move into a home, grow his own vegetables, be in a healthy environment through the pandemic, and then not pay too much in mortgage. His mortgage essentially covered by his tenants, who are paying a very reasonable rent there. So that was a great case study. That was a great success.
And I'm thinking, I know there were grants involved, housing conservation and lead and asbestos abatement,
Right.
In the renovation, so it wasn't a totally inexpensive process,
Right.
but it still didn't add up to anything like over $200,000
No.
per unit, and that's 2 units.
That's 2 units. No, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, and they might be somewhere on our website. But I think we purchased the house for, let's just say 70 is the number in my head, and we probably, put 40 or maybe $50,000 into it, and then we're able to sell it, recoup everything that we outlaid, and set our home on his way. And we hired local people. The plumber was local, the electrician was local. A lot of sweat equity and community investment went into that property. The tenants were involved in all of that and supportive. In fact, the tenants thought about becoming the homeowners, and that was an exciting kind of endeavor. And I hope at some point that we'll have another property that's ready for home ownership opportunities, and those tenants will avail themselves of that, because that's an exciting thing to kind of shepherd somebody along the way for. So that's one property that we have in New London. And then we also have a community garden site on Ledyard Street, right near the corner of Vauxhall and Ledyard. There's quite a small lot, too small to build on, that was gifted to Fresh New London, which, because of the nature of its nonprofit status, it's fiscally sponsored by a larger organization that's not based here. So they came to the Community Land Trust and said, will you facilitate this for us? And of course we were happy to do that with them and for them. So that land is held by the Community Land Trust and leased, very affordably to Fresh New London for those 16 garden plots and quite a few fruit trees, and then snack beds that are along Vauxhall Street that are planted, along Ledyard Street, which are planted with strawberries and peas and cherry tomatoes and
all these
herbs.
things that people can just walk by
That's right.
and munch.
Yeah. And there's a little greenhouse there, not quite a year-round greenhouse, but certainly like a place where you can, starts and extend the season a little bit. There's a shed and rainwater catchment. And then the Fresh kind of youth program there, worked on this beautiful mural that's there. So it turned an empty lot that nobody cared about and nobody really took care of into a resource that everybody takes care of. And so it really has, given that neighborhood a gathering place and a place to meet and be real neighbors for one another. So that's an exciting project as well, and great to partner with a local organization to do that.
Well, even though the impetus initially, I think, for the Community Land Trust was the housing challenges that New London faces, the low rate of home ownership, the high cost frequently of renting, the instability of many neighborhoods that were vibrant 70 years ago, but had really deteriorated. But the Community Land Trust isn't just focused on housing, as you noticed.
Right. Yeah, so the green space is one leg of the triad. Of course, housing is the other. And then the piece that we're still aspirational about as opposed to operational is community space. And just to give the example of Fresh New London for a second, just because that's an organization I know well and used to work for, in the course of its institutional life, Fresh New London has had offices in half a dozen locations around the city of New London. They were at the Gemma Moran. They were at the at Garfield Mills for a little while. They were in the basement of St. James Church. They were at the what's now what became the Drop-In Learning Center behind what's that church on the corner of Hempstead and Broad. I guess it's Miracle Temple now, but it was
had been Second Congregational.
So it's moved to all of these different places, and kind of looking for like very affordable rent. And then each of those moves, you lose something, just the way tenants lose something every time they move. Now Fresh is quite stable, but renting at Broad and Cottage Street. But poll the local nonprofit organizations that do not own their own buildings, and of course there are quite a number, and you hear this kind of litany of the, all of the quest for office space. And now I wonder, now with, the pandemic has changed the way people work, and I wonder if it feels as urgent now as it did before. We've all grown accustomed to Zoom meetings and working from home and all of that. But that sense of a space where we come together that isn't a church basement, that isn't space that we're sharing with 5 or 6 different organizations, is still something that has proved elusive in New London. And so on our front burner or on our middle burner is looking for a place where that could house a number of different organizations with different missions, but parallel values, meeting space for whether it's groups of 2 or 3 or large community gatherings. And since the Martin Center went away, that kind of space
that actually houses many organizations.
And had up to medium-sized spaces where groups could meet, and did. That was a very, for warts and all, like that was a very, very busy, dynamic space for a very long time. And while the recreation center that's conceived of for down in Fort Trumbull, is going to meet some of the community's health and wellness needs and house the parks and recreation, it's unlikely that it will become that kind of hive of organizations and meetings that so many community groups have identified as a real need. So we're still looking for that spot where the Community Land Trust could, hold the ground lease and be the pass-through for the improvements on the building that need to happen, and then the groups can operate the building as a cooperative, or perhaps there's one organization that's in charge. So I'm just sort of putting that out there, that we've heard that that's a need here in New London. We're looking. My own personal dream is to buy the old Sheffield dry cleaning place and turn that into a gathering space. But right now the price is a little too steep for that one.
Yeah, so. You would think though that New London does still have some larger buildings. As schools have gotten more consolidated, and as the factory-based industries have been, you know, largely discontinued, other than toothpaste. You know, we don't manufacture that much here, whereas 100 years ago, you know, there were felt factories and silk factories and linoleum factories and ironworks.
Yeah.
But some of those buildings are still around, and, you know, to adaptively reuse them in some way or other would be fantastic.
It's page 39 of the Plan for Conservation and Development is adaptive reuse. So I'm only joking about what page it is. I don't know the document by heart, but so those are the three pillars, right? Affordable housing, green space, and open space, and then community space. And those three legs sort of line up with the three parts of our board, right? We have this three-part board. But I guess before I get into that, I should say that the New London chapter is just one small part of this larger regional organization. And I think it was smart. It seemed like more work at the time, but it was a smart decision by, you know, the kind of founders and conceivers of this idea to organize regionally and not just as the 27,000 of us who live here in New London. So recognizing how interconnected our area, how interconnected Southeastern Connecticut is. So under the umbrella of the Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust is legacy community land trust properties from Norwich, the Rose City Community Land Trust. So SECTCLT has, I think, 4 properties that we sort of inherited from Rose City Community Land Trust. And then we have this you know, idea that there can be more chapters like the New London chapter throughout our area. And then regionally, of course, they're interested in all the same things I just mentioned, but instead of green space as community gardens or pocket parks, they're really looking at the lack of affordable growing space and farmland throughout our region, which used to be quite dynamic, and development, you know, has a different kind of tenor in rural areas, but is just as voracious and wanting to chew up more land. So the Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust was recently an instrumental component of a much larger deal to put 150 acres of farmland into trust and to provide a permanent home for Provider Farm to be growing in a permaculture kind of, you know, a 7th generation kind of way. So that's a very exciting project, and kind of also puts us in touch with you know, the need for affordable housing, for workforce housing in some of these communities that have gotten very, very expensive, to the surprise, I think, of many of the people who are long-term residents. You know, kind of looking around and saying, wait, what? Like, when did this happen? And how do we sort of arrest the progression of just this being not affordable for anybody? Oh, eventually, including myself. So that's been an exciting dimension there, and I think that just as we hope to replicate the experience of Press Street, or the magic that happened there at Press Street, the Regional Land Trust is looking for other opportunities to provide the institutional framework within which this farmland can be held in trust.
Now, is the Southeast Connecticut Community Land Trust limited to New London County? Is that kind of the border?
That's kind of the border. The contours are more or less the same as New London County. Yep, I think we go to the Connecticut River and then up.
I have friends in Willimantic who would be very excited for that kind of thing there, because they do have, you know, challenges with real estate developers wanting to build luxury apartments in open space that may or may not be being used agriculturally.
Right.
Some of it might just be natural space, and it's a real challenge. It's someone who has this farmland. What did we learn recently? That good farmland is going for what, $30,000 an acre.
Yeah,
so
that's a lot of beets.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, if you're going to put, an apartment building on it, well, maybe that doesn't sound like that much, but if you want it to farm on it, how can,
right?
Yeah, we just can't build that kind of overhead into food prices.
Right, and we're already seeing, right, the kind of the other side of that is that, with rising fuel costs over the course of the summer, we saw the price of food go up substantially because people shipping food, providers shipping food from far away, tacked all that onto the cost of food. So to the extent that we can build a local food system and support and make sustainable the lives of the people who grow our food, we like that might cost a little bit more in the short term, but building that kind of resilience that we could go 10 minutes to get our eggs instead of getting eggs from the eastern shore of Maryland, for example. Right. Is a benefit in so many more ways than just the life of the happy Salem chicken or Willimantic chicken, right? So thinking, one of the great things about Community Land Trust is you have an opportunity to have all these kinds of conversations about, how do we build a food system, a housing system, a transportation system that is of benefit to everybody, where there are no losers, where we all can really benefit.
So, what is happening now? I mean, it seems as though the Community Land Trust did get some ARPA funds.
Right.
So, how are you doing at spending them?
I'd say, it should be easy to spend $80,000, but it's not particularly easy. I mean, we have access to, sort of the good graces of the New London City Council and the Office of Economic Development. The Land Trust has access to $80,000 towards, we've been told, towards construction and sort of shovel-ready costs of a project. And our New London chapter has been looking very, very hard at a project that's kind of fits the bill. And we've so far failed to find one for a number of different reasons. One, the houses that are cheap are going for cash, and we don't have cash. And the houses...
Well, they probably can't pass a bank inspection, right?
No, I mean, then the developers have a whole other set of problems on their hands, right? But we have been, trying to approach families, approach vacant, the owners of vacant and derelict properties, sort of trying to make, begin conversations with them about transferring those properties to us and, the Community Land Trust, re-enlivening not just their property, but, the block that property is on. So far, those conversations haven't resulted in anything. We've gone to some auctions. Of course, again, at auctions, you're buying a very sad story, right, of displacement and financial ruin and all of that. But you're also having to, bring cash, and you're taking on a lot of risk because you can't. You have to make a very quick decision, and it's not easy to get out of those once you're in them. So anyway, all that to say, we haven't found the perfect house for this money yet, but we're looking very hard, and so So that's kind of piece number one. And then in the process of, pursuing that funding and, kind of thinking it through as a chapter, we've also written quite a few grants and been quite successful in writing grants. We are, Ronna, at this point, and have been for a better part of 2 years, volunteer-only organization, except we pay a part-time bookkeeper and we contract for some social media stuff. But myself, the board members, of course, all of us who meet regularly, of course, are unpaid. We are hiring 2 people. You've heard it here first.
Wow.
2 staff people. We have 2 positions. We'd love to hire these 2 people at the same time. We're hiring an executive director for the Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust. And then we're also hiring, a community organizer for our New London chapter to do in a more systematic and accountable way, do some of the work that I've been doing when I can, in terms of outreach and relationship building, and then hopefully that person would also begin to shepherd would-be homeowners through what owning a home with the Community Land Trust, what that looks like. So viewers of your program can go to secclt.org, SECT, Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust, secclt.org, and over on the right-hand top, the employment button will bring you to those 2 job descriptions. It's open until it's filled. We'd really like to get some great applications in before the end of the year, and put some local people to work doing this work, supported by all of us dynamic volunteers who have learned by making lots of mistakes in this work. But we still feel very young and new. Even though we've been successful on these now 3 projects regionally, and are looking for another one. So so folks are watching this program and thinking, well, I don't have any heirs, and I'd really love to see my home go to a hardworking, low to moderate income family from this area. I would love to give that home ownership opportunity to the next generation. They can reach out to us through the website. We can talk about estate planning. We have a meeting coming up at the end of January. We meet once a month as a New London chapter, and we'll be meeting on Thursday, January 26th. It's crazy to be thinking about January, right? But I know it's just around the corner.
It's only a little more than a month away. Wow.
Yeah. So Thursday, January 26th at 6 p.m. We often meet at Victory House on Broad Street. The address is 32 Broad. But folks can check the website a little closer in case we find a better offer.
Now, one thing that, the Press Street House, you mentioned that it's got a rental apartment, and I can't help but notice that when Echo and Hope have done, created their housing and both new housing and renovated housing, they've sought to have that kind of built-in tenant on the spot.
Right.
On Belden Street, those are mostly 2-family houses, and I think about that house on the corner of Pearl Street in Washington, maybe, that had been maybe a Hope house at one time.
Right.
So it seems as though one of the long-standing ways to help make housing more affordable to moderate income people is to give them a tenant.
Yes. Yeah. We noticed that right away in looking at houses. As the owner of a 2-family, obviously you pay more, but you get built-in security. which is such a huge thing for everybody, but particularly for low to moderate income first-time homeowners who probably don't have a lot of, wider family support or access to intergenerational wealth. There's no rich uncle out there ready to bail somebody out, and so yeah, I think in many cases you can negotiate for a mortgage that's more or less covered by the rental income that you bring in every month, and then you can also, you can schedule out maintenance and put some money aside. And our community land trust not just encourages but requires our homeowner to put some money in a special fund for eventual repairs, because they come up and they're the kind of thing that you don't want to put a new boiler on your credit card and then be making minimum payments for the next 100 years on these kind of emergency things that only happen at the worst possible time, right? And so, but looking around New London, of course, there are lots of two-family homes and quite a few big old apartment buildings, but if you were only looking to buy two families, you might wait a while because they don't come up very often, and they don't often stay homeowner occupied with a tenant. They are often scooped up by investors who know, who aren't going to take really great care of the property, who don't live in New London largely, and who just kind of milk it and milk the people. And then the minute something comes up, people are out on their ear, and there's always new people ready to take over those apartments. And so in a city of renters, kind of helping to move, right, we're 60%, 62% renters here in New London, helping to move to more stable rental situations, good rental situations. Our bylaws say that anybody who buys a two-family through the Community Land Trust, and this would be the case for Echo or Hope as well, goes through a landlord training program and has to kind of learn how to be a good landlord and a legally responsible landlord as well. And so that's all very important. But yeah, we have a real kind of crisis around the rental market right now, and it's very troubling, and it seems sort of overwhelming, and yet there are tools that could be at our disposal, that should be at our disposal, that could ease things up a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of the current population of New London is made up of people who don't have generational wealth to fall back on.
That's right.
They don't have money for that, 10 to 20% down payment if they're purchasing.
Right.
So everything's going to be more expensive.
Right.
And less accessible. Well, so I did want to segue, of course.
Yes.
In the 2021 legislative session in Connecticut, Desegregate Connecticut shepherded some legislation that was meant to address some of the problems of Connecticut's housing woes. Affordability in many communities was one issue. Racial and economic segregation. I think Connecticut is one of the, I think I read it was like number 3 in terms of wealth gap.
Wow.
And the in the nation, we've got the richest and the poorest. Mm-hmm. And the richest and the poorest usually don't live next door to each other.
That's right.
Unlike in the Little Women movie, where the rich people and the, middle income people and the kind of poor people in the shack are all sort of in the same neighborhood.
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore. So so I wanted to talk a little bit about current events.
Sure.
One of the recommendations that has been in the news recently, because City Council is voting on Monday, is whether to allow accessory dwelling units by right in single family, that's R1 and R1A neighborhoods.
Right.
And full disclaimer, I live in a neighborhood that is zoned R1, but it's also an old neighborhood. Most of the houses were built between 1890 and 1920, so the neighborhood predated zoning. So there are quite a few two-family houses in my R1 zone. And, in the 25 years I've lived in my house, it's been, I saw that it was a stabilizing factor in my neighborhood for a long time. The house on one side of me, when I moved in, the 80-year-old, grandma lived there, and her 50-year-old son and his wife and daughter lived upstairs, and she passed away, and now the sister of the upstairs owners lives downstairs. Right. So the house has been resided in by family members, probably for the last 50, 60 years. Right. To me, that seems like a way to really stabilize a neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I tend to feel like, this is a good idea to have, two families if you want them.
Right.
So, what's your view on the whole situation?
Yeah. My view on the whole situation is that encouraging aging in place, encouraging young people to stay close to family if they want to. We have an elder crisis in Connecticut, and we also have a youth drain in Connecticut, right? And allowing for more density and giving homeowners more options might address both of those ends of the age spectrum and income spectrum, and allow for just to have more options. And this isn't just my view, Ronna. This is the view of the
we can hold
the New London Affordable Housing Plan.
This camera's on you. No? Yeah.
This one? Which one?
No, that one. That way.
This way?
The New London. So this affordable housing plan was approved in May.
This was approved in May by New London City Council. It was drafted in consultation, and actually represents a lot of work done by New London residents and community members, and then of course the professional staff of the city. And it's a good plan. There's a lot in here that's really great. Inclusionary housing. It calls for a fair rent commission. It calls for landlord registry to give renters more recourse when they're mistreated by landlords. But it has a whole section on the charmingly named accessory dwelling units, which are these small apartments either within a single-family house, kind of turning a single-family house into a two-family, or adding a mother-in-law addition into it, or having a tiny house kind of on the property. And of course all of these are regulated, so they're not like in your neighbor's driveway and all of that kind of thing. But the Affordable Housing Plan says that there are very few accessory dwelling units in New London, and that barriers should be removed so that this can be an option for more New London residents. It also says that ADUs should transition to being by right permitting, which doesn't mean the city doesn't have any points of intervention if things are not being done properly, right? There's still mechanisms and permits and site maps and all of these kind of moments during the process that that the city can be involved. In other communities, accessory dwelling units are really being used by municipalities to address critical housing needs. In one town in Oregon, as a homeowner, all the costs of adding an accessory dwelling unit to your property are paid for if you agree that for 5 years you rent to somebody who's transitioning out of homelessness. In Los Angeles, there's a forgivable loan program, and the whole thing is facilitated by somebody within the city government, including finding you a tenant. Wow. And then, as long as you kind of stick within the parameters of the program, after 5 years, you have a money-making unit within your property and the freedom to rent to whomever you want, right? After kind of, renting to a selected person for a relatively short period of time. In Boston, there's a forgivable loan, and if you rent to a veteran, military veteran, you get access to other incentives and all of this sort of thing. So municipalities are really using this tool as a relatively low cost, spread out way of increasing density, meeting the targeted needs of specific populations, and providing a source of income to homeowners, and then kind of helping them, right? In many of these, it's a real hands-on programs, helping those homeowners utilize that new income in ways that increase their property values overall, deal with long-standing kind of maintenance issues that have gotten away from them. And, I'm not an elder yet, but maintenance has gotten away from me, and it's not just money, right? It's also just like the time, and the, small problems can become quite large, owning a home is a big responsibility. Anyway, this is a really exciting tool, and it could be, the kind of thing that the City of New London just embraces and says, yes, this solves 5 or 6 different problems for us all at once. And for some reason, the city is taking the exact opposite attack. It's, having gone to the city council meeting last week where this came up, and I spoke in favor of it, reminded the councilors that they really just passed this plan, and this is their first opportunity really to make a check mark next to something, and is an easy check mark to make, right? Yes, and but instead it's other speakers before city council were kind of making it sound like, how dare the state come in and tell us what to do? We need to have control over this. And it's like, well, the control is actually keeping people from pursuing this option, right? Because accessory dwelling units, I think Councilor Burke brought up this point, they're not coming before planning and zoning. And so this either means that, people aren't doing it, it's feeling too onerous and too high stakes, right, for a homeowner like me to even think about, or, and this is even worse, or people are just kind of doing whatever they want, not seeking permits, and then of course that's dangerous. And we've had this rash of fires here in New London, and of course I'm not saying that's because of illegal apartments or anything, but there's a reason that we have these rules, and when people add extra apartments to their homes without going through the proper channels, electrical fires and lack of access, emergency access out, all of these things become quite. It's easy to cut corners, I guess is what I'm saying. But anyway, so I'm troubled by the fact that nobody's coming before planning and zoning with accessory dwelling units, knowing that, a lot of people are seeking homes and not having the resources. There's definitely doubling and tripling up happening in apartments throughout New London.
And on the other side, flip side of the same coin, maybe, you know, since you brought up the recent fires, that I don't think since I moved to New London I've seen this kind of rash of fires. There was the one fire on Mott Avenue that impacted 3 properties or 5 properties, and only one of them was occupied.
That's right.
So we have on one side the apartments that maybe are overcrowded because people can't afford apartments the size that could easily and properly accommodate the number of people in the family. On the other hand, you have the snowbirds, whose are largely in the wealthy areas of New London, whose properties are vacant over the winter, and all kinds. I had to even travel for a week in the winter because you can have a freeze, pipes can freeze, and if there isn't someone there to really supervise what's going on a day-to-day basis, having a building that's empty half of the year is actually also not good practice.
That's 100%. Yeah. Yeah, I think since the beginning of December, that fire that you mentioned on Mott was right before Thanksgiving. But since the beginning of December, there have been 3 fires that I saw. One on Belden Court, Thames Street, and Montauk.
Montauk, yeah.
And if you go just a little further back, there was a fire on Ocean before Thanksgiving as well. And besides the
firefighters are great, but I don't want them to have to work that hard.
Oh, I mean, on Belden Court, they came twice in 24 hours, and in I think in at least 2 of those fires, firefighters were sent to the hospital. One with a hurt knee, and one with I can't remember what smoke inhalation. And so, looking at the literature, I think there were 69 fires so far in 2022 and 80 something last year. So we're more or less on track, I guess. But it seems like there've really been quite a few in recent days, and in none of these, in the last 3, there's no cause and there's no accusation of foul play at this point. But the Thames one, the Montauk one sounds like a cooking fire and basement fire in Belden, and I worry as the weather's getting cold and the price of fuel is so expensive, my mind immediately goes to these being, somehow people trying to get warm and not going about it the right way, and with devastating consequences. And thankfully, no one's been badly hurt, but the property destruction has been significant, and the danger and the hard work and the wear and tear on our fire equipment and of course our human resources has been significant as well. So and it's only December, right? We're in for, by all reports, a cold, long winter.
Now, I kind of reached out to a friend of mine in Willimantic because I have been seeing in the newspapers locally, Groton opted out of, the ADUs, I believe. Stonington did. Old Saybrook, Waterford. Most of the shoreline towns seem to have opted out. But I did ask a friend of mine who's on the Planning and Zoning Commission in Willimantic what they did, because Willimantic has a lot in common with New London.
Sure.
A lot of old housing, a lot of people of limited income, and probably a big wealth gap as well. And interestingly, her response was that Willimantic went a totally different direction. They saw the desegregate recommendations for ADU was something that they had been looking at anyway, so they did not opt out. They didn't hold the public hearing. They didn't hold the vote. And what they did was they changed their regulations to comply. And I guess they're still in the middle of the process. They have to tweak things.
Right.
But their regulations that they put in effect in June said, the accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 30% of the habitable floor space of the primary dwelling. No structural alterations can be made to the appearance of the dwelling as viewed from the street. And this is what's allowed by right. The accessory dwelling unit shall meet all building codes and be approved by the health department. Off-street parking is available, and an accessory dwelling unit meeting the above conditions may be added to an accessory building, such as a barn or a garage, or as a separate accessory building. And that's by right. There might be some other possibilities that they can partake in that might still require a special permit. But I know one of the differences between that and New London's is that I believe our current New London special permit doesn't allow the accessory dwelling unit to exceed 25%. So there's a little bit more of a restriction on size.
Sure.
And so I don't know.
Yeah.
There are other directions we could be going.
Yeah.
And I guess because people are very, we haven't really started budget season yet, but it's going to come, pretty soon. And I think you mentioned density, and one advantage of increasing density where there are already buildings and residences is that you don't really put more of a strain on public works. Star Street is a very short block, less than 400 feet long. It serves 26 living units. And when Public Works plows that street, they're serving 26 families.
That's right. Yep.
And my street is, I looked at the map, is maybe 3 times that length and has about 26 families. But, it's a longer street.
Right.
But if it became more dense, really the strain on the city would not be more.
That's right.
If half a dozen of the single-family houses had accessory dwelling units.
Right.
So when we're thinking about efficient public services, putting the new residences where the city is already providing services.
That's right.
And not necessarily even requiring, new electric hookups or new water hookups.
Right.
The accessory dwelling unit can go, get their hookup from the primary dwelling. It doesn't have to be a whole new hookup. This is like, if you care about taxes, let's try to be a little more efficient. Strong Towns is fond of reminding people that poor neighborhoods subsidize wealthy neighborhoods. And it's because getting those services is so much more efficient where the housing stands.
Because of the density, right? You're serving hundreds of people instead of 10 people. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much to be said in favor of this, including, you can look at that same delivery of services from through an environmental lens as well, and talk about sort of efficiency and conservation of resources and all of that. So I'm perplexed that this is kind of rolling out in New London in such a kind of it just makes me go like this. Like this, this isn't a surprise, right? Like this, planning and zoning has had this for a long time, and the city has known that these state regulations were coming for a long time. We've waited until the very last city council meeting of the year,
January 1st,
and it's kind of coming down to the wire in this way that is unnecessarily dramatic and high stakes.
Okay, I'm going to warn you. You have 1 minute left.
Okay,
well, they say three. But that's generous.
Well, so I would just say, like the city council is deciding on this at this next city council meeting on Monday, 7 p.m. City Council chambers. If you don't feel comfortable going to City Council chambers, you can email Jen Stars. It's start with a Z at newlondonct.org. Make your views known. She'll be sure to get those out to all of our city councilors. You can also just write them. All their email addresses are on the City Council's website, or the City of New London's website. This is just it's one more tool in the toolbox, and I feel like we have an affordable housing crisis here, and not availing ourselves of this seems like a mistake.
And as the last thing, remind people about the next meeting in January.
Sure.
For anyone who wants to learn more or get more involved in the Community Land Trust.
Thursday, January 26th at 6 p.m. And you can check the website a little closer to the date for where we're going to meet.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Frida.
Yeah, thank you, Ronna.
And next week, well, I'm not sure who's going to be on next week, but we're going to stick with the theme of New London nonprofits. So we will see you then, and thank you, Frida, and maybe some of you will be at City Council.
That would be fantastic.
Okay, we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you, Ronna.
Crying out loud, babe, or Christmas sky.